Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 34. In this lesson we're going to continue to look at emphasis, we're going to look at inversion, and I'm going to give you my thoughts about how you should use inversion in your professional English writing. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, there are many ways you can emphasize a message when you're writing. In the first few lessons, lessons 1, lessons 2, and lessons 10, when we looked at putting things in the right order, the active voice, and short sentences, these were all about front-loading emphasis. So getting your message together at the front of the sentence, at the beginning of the sentence, so the reader knows exactly why you are writing. And then in the last lesson, we had a look at back-end emphasis, where we want to focus on a word or a phrase and make sure we put that at the end of the sentence so the reader remembers that message and takes it away with them. But of course, there are other forms of emphasis, and I want to divide these forms of emphasis up into less complicated and more complicated. And I would say that front-loading emphasis and rear-end emphasis, or back-end emphasis, would be perhaps the least complicated forms, although back-end emphasis is more complicated than front-end emphasis. Then we have more complicated forms, and I'm going to put inversion very much in this category, because inversion is essentially reversing word order. And if we remember the first couple of lessons, when we think about reversing word order, this should automatically start ringing alarm bells in our heads. Because if we have a message, and that message is a simple message, and then we start reversing the word order, then straight away we're making it more complicated. And this is one of the reasons why we should be very careful with the passive voice, because the passive, to a certain extent, plays around with the order of words. And lots of people, lots of lawyers, for example, prefer the passive over the active for no reason. And a lot of my work as a copy editor and as a proofreader is reversing or changing the passive back into the active voice. And certainly when I see inversion, then this is something that I have to then rearrange when I do my work. But I understand why people want to use inversion. My point is that using inversion, although it's a very effective form of emphasis, it's a high-risk strategy. What you're doing is you're preferring complexity over simplicity, and not only that, in choosing complexity, if you get it wrong, then the chances are the whole sentence will be wrong, and then that leads to misunderstanding. There'll be more about that when I talk about the teaching tips in a few seconds' time. But before we get there, let's have a look at the main forms of inversion. So these are the forms that you will see if you have a look at an advanced English grammar book. And there are two main forms, which are based on negative adverbials and conditional inversions. So negative adverbials, you see there next to me, rarely, seldom, never. So rarely have I ever seen this before. And then you've got other negative adverbials in which you have a slightly more complex inverted structure. So hardly, scarcely, barely. Hardly had the memo been completed, did the client call. And of course, there are a number of variations that you can have with that inverted structure. Now, I have to say here as well, just to remind you guys, is when you use negative adverbials, there is a possibility you might create a double negative. So in using a complex structure, which potentially could go wrong, and then throwing in a double negative as well, you're really making the reader's life very, very difficult. So that's something to bear in mind when you're using inversions using negative adverbials. The other form, conditional inversions, is a simpler form of inversion. So were I to be in your shoes, I would, whatever it might be, would normally simply be if I were in your shoes. So this is a simpler form of inversion. Now, in this lesson, I'm not going to go into detail about how you create these inverted forms, and I'll explain in more detail when we go through the teaching tips. But if you want to find out how to create these inverted forms, Google is your friend. Type inversion English grammar into Google. You're going to find plenty of resources. Or you can have a look at a good old-fashioned advanced English grammar book. Okay, so what are the teaching tips? Plain language communication, plain English communication is based on simplicity. And in that simplicity, we don't lose professionalism. We don't lose legality. We don't lose the business sense of our writing. We can keep all of those things and yet write in a simple way. You might know the abbreviation, or the acronym, KISS, which I know as Keep It Simple Stupid. This is an army acronym, and the whole idea is if you have a plan, our plan is writing in this case, and you have a message to communicate, then we want to keep the message as simple as possible as to avoid misunderstanding. So simplicity and clarity are two elements which are fundamentally linked together. Elegance, and inversion is a form of elegant writing, is not part of that. So I would say to you, prefer clarity and simplicity over elegance whenever you can, which to be honest is all of the time. And the main reason for that is if you get it wrong, as I said before, it's likely the whole sentence will be a mess. And then what you're doing is you're presenting something to the person who has to read it, and you're saying to the reader, okay, I've tried to show you my skills, it's gone wrong, now it's your problem, you've got to work it out. But if you try to communicate that message in a simpler way, in the active voice generally, in which the structure is simple, the structure is well known, a very common structure of understanding in many languages around the world, then people will understand that message in a much easier way, or much more easily, compared to using complicated forms such as inversion. And I would also say this, I've talked before about writing and creating a narrative, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you use linkers and transitions to create that narrative, then that's a fantastic piece of writing. You're linking everything together, so you don't have texts which operate as islands, an island of text over here, an island of text over there, but rather everything is joined together so the reader can follow your arguments. If you're using a narrative which is based on inversion, I would argue that that narrative doesn't fit the kind of business or legal writing that we really want to achieve. So if a lawyer was to write, for example, were I to be in your position, I would advise you to do this, it's just the wrong narrative. So this form of inversion, using negative adverbials or conditional inversion, doesn't fit the kind of professional English writing narrative that we want to show to the person who's reading. And to be honest, this is something that I rarely see in the work that I do. I do see it from time to time, and I do understand the context in which the inverted form was used. But I would 99.9% of the time, as I said, there's always that possibility the context might exist, and 99.9% of the time I would reverse the inversion to get back to that simpler message. Okay, time for questions. And remember, these questions are only available to those people who are following me on my Patreon page. If you would like to join me on Patreon and do my online legal English, business English writing courses, then you'll find a link below this video. I'd like you to look at the inverted forms and change them back into simpler forms while focusing on either emphasis at the beginning or emphasis at the end. The choice is yours. But you're going to have a number of sentences and you simply have to uninvert them. So by way of example, were Company A to file a claim, we wouldn't have much time to respond. Would simply be, if Company A were to file a claim, we wouldn't have much time to respond. So the conditional inverted forms will be quite easy to change. The inverted forms based on negative adverbials might cause you to think a little bit and scratch your head. So try those questions, and then once you've finished, have a look at my answer video to see if your answers are similar or the same as mine.